Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Catherine Atkin, and I'm the co-founder of the Global Digital Single Market Data Alliance. I'm delighted to open today's session and to introduce a conversation that sits at the heart of one of the most pressing challenges in sustainability today: how organizations can move from manual, fragmented ESG data collection to truly investor-grade, digitally verifiable reporting so that we can create new markets, decarbonize the globe, and create a just transition. Today's discussion will examine how combining distributed ledger technology with XBRL can help organizations not only meeting evolving regulatory obligations, but also reduce reporting burdens and unlock meaningful competitive advantages. The blueprint we'll be discussing outlines key recommendations designed to support a future of efficient, accurate, and highly credible sustainability disclosures, fostering investor confidence, and driving impactful climate action. I'm honored to be joined by an exceptional group of experts. Wes Geisenberger, the VP for Sustainability and ESG at the Hedera Foundation; Juan Ignacio Ibanez, ESG and Policy Director at Exponential Science; and Liv Watson, co-founder of the Global Digital Single Market Data Alliance, along with me, and our other colleague, Ben McDonald. Each brings deep experience across financial reporting, digital standards, and next-gen technology infrastructure. We're going to kick this off today with some introduction by Liv Watson, who's going to talk a little bit about this blueprint and kind of what's the foundation for this work that brought us all together to this conversation today. Liv.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and the panels. Just to set the stage, why are we doing this? The cost of data to communicate between system and the fact that now sustainability and climate are being standardized into financial reporting, we now need the same rigorous infrastructure to be able that financial reporting has in the data that is sitting in multiple places around the world or in multiple data format to be using advanced technology so that we can create auditor assurable data to market. If not, it's easy for data to become a liability, or you can look at it from an asset. Why are we doing this? When you look at the cost of compliance for aggregating climate-related data, it's a huge cost to the company. It's not just a huge cost, but it sits in mostly in Excel or Word document or silos within the organization, and it's not auditable and verifiable. So this, when we connected, I'm one of the founders of XBRL and been around helping getting data digital, machine readable, and discoverable. But the missing link has been, how do we capture the data from the source and link it and reduce the cost of compliance so that companies can be part of this green transition and meeting new regulatory reporting regimes. So we are very thankful. Catherine is also a co-author on this paper, but we're very thankful to the Hedera Foundation to take this initiative and allow us to collaborate on this white paper. This white paper outlines the challenges, gives some recommendations on how we can get data problem solved by connecting distributed ledger technology and connect that directly into XBRL instance documents that can then be reported to regulators, which is a regulatory mandate. Both ISSB, GRI, and the European Sustainability Reporting Standards is built around the open data standard XBRL. XBRL, for those of you who don't know what it is, just think about it, the barcode on packaged good. It doesn't matter if you have a blue scanner or a pink scanner. The technology inside knows how to read the barcodes. Who develops the barcodes or taxonomies, as we talk in the world of technology? It is, every item is tagged, and those tags or taxonomies are developed by the standards boards, and the regulators then mandates that the disclosures are in XBRL to make that data machine readable, human readable, and discoverable. So the ultimate goal is to have high quality, reliable, comparable climate environmental information. And I like to make the point there that we focused on climate first, but the next wave is also environmental information that can be seamlessly integrated into financial decision making. At the bottom, you see the link. This is a living document. We want your feedback. So please connect this to the Google Doc and bring us also the feedback. With that, why are we doing this? Because the cost to compliance for companies to produce investor-grade data to market is too high, too complex, and that is why I'm so excited to be working with Hedera and the Hedera ecosystem to be able to connect that to XBRL instance document. With that, I want to leave you with one thought. This is no longer a technical problem. This is a human consensus problem. And to be able to both, as the Hedera is open source, XBRL is open source and open data standards, is that we are bringing these two technology dynamics together to be able to do one thing, not just create auditable data, but to actually reduce the reporting burden on the companies. And with that, I am just going to give a little thank you to our co-author and also thank Wes and the team over at Hedera for all the feedback we got. But we believe that embracing distributed ledger technology alongside XBRL, organization can not only meet evolving regulatory obligation, but also unlocks significant competitive advantage. Reporting burden is reduced. So this document outlines this new ecosystem environment, and we want your feedback. But what I'm most looking forward to is the discussion that we will take next. Back to you, Catherine, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Liv. And it's just an honor and just a lot of fun to be on this journey with you, particularly on this blueprint and just more generally as we work together and with others to, grow in the same direction to like unlock these, sort of the places where we can create the most impact. So also just really want to thank Wes and the Hedera Foundation team, and excited about this conversation. So let's kick it off. And I think what we'll start with, Liv, is you just talked about some of the actual challenges. So I'm wondering, before I get to Wes and Juan and let them kick it off, is there anything more that you'd like to say about kind of what are these, if you had to say, is like the bottleneck, the cost, the quality, the drain on internal resources, any more insight, given your experience working inside large corporations and with large corporations as they attempt to meet these requirements and actually use data for improvement?
Yeah, I think, the dynamic change here, right, is that before climate and sustainability data ended up in reports, they weren't audited and assurable. And the challenge today, as an auditor, my past life, an auditor has to be able to verify the data from the source. Otherwise, with new regulation that's come out like CAM, not so new, but being embedded, which stands for Key Audit Matters. If a company does not able to have an auditor verify the data from where it came from, that can end up in a public audit report as a key audit matter in their audit, and the market can react. So by combining these two technologies, I'm very excited, and it's been a pleasure to work with the Hedera and the Hedera community, because they are also on the same mission to be able to verifiable data that can be used and trusted, not just for statutory reporting, but also for companies to run their company and trust the data that they make decision on. So yes, I think that this last 8-month journey and getting feedback on this and writing this paper has brought all of those key topics to the front line. So again, yes, it's not an option. This is really a must-have.
Thanks, Liv. And so let's actually hand the baton over to Wes and Juan, and just from your vantage point, given your role at the Hedera Foundation, Exponential Science, your work with DLT and the Hedera ecosystem, from that vantage point, what are you seeing as these, the current state of play, the fragmentation? Why does investor grade data matter? What's the real cost of poor data comparability? And as you do that, just kind of an additional like prompt to you is, can you actually identify kind of what are the, given that sort of problem statement, what are the two or three sort of non-negotiable characteristics that we need to be pushing for in order to address these challenges and kind of unlock the impact that we're also committed to seeing? So Wes, you first.
And I just want to say thank you before I get started to both Liv, Catherine, and the entire team. This work was spearheaded by you and, with under the guide of the Capitals Coalition and others. And it really is a great testament to how we should be thinking and going forward. And I do encourage everyone to read, collaborate, and get involved in our community. This community that we have spans technical developers, product managers to market experts, industry experts. And we meet every week. And we've done so for the last 4+ years. And, we're excited to be continuing the conversations, especially around statutory reporting and sustainability specific reporting within the Hedera Guardian community and how that applies from an XBRL perspective. To get into, well, where should we be focusing on and what are we doing? Anytime we're submitting data to a government or any type of regulator, we need to know fundamentally who said what when. Not just this company is attesting to this value. We need to know under which methodology was that data collected, from which source. And public ledgers are a really good way to immutably say, in a way that's not going to change, here are the rules, published independently. I use them, somebody else can use them. And by the way, here's the data for not just my entire business, but every sub-entity that they applied this methodology faithfully. It's not just trust a piece of venture-backed software that was created 10 years ago for the latest wave of ESG reporting or sustainability or statutory reporting. It's here's an open source rules engine. Here's an open source set of rules. Here's the specific data. And a person, sensor, or system said this, and it aggregated up to this specific point or thousands of data points that are submitted to a regulator to prove that I'm complying or I'm disclosing appropriately. And I think that that's the key takeaway that we need to get to is who said what when, and different identities on a public ledger tied to a specific account, tied to tens of thousands of data points that aggregate to a select few that are disclosed, all need to have that audit trail. And when we meet with auditors or enterprises, they're all thinking about what comes in 2026, 2027, 2028 as we get to higher grades of assurance, limited, and then towards 2030 reasonable in different regimes around the world, not just in the EU or looking towards California, which I know Catherine has a lot of expertise on. But I'll take a pause there and maybe pass the ball over to Juan to add his thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, thank you, Wes, for passing the ball, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's really admirable the work that you're doing, and I'm really excited by this work stream right here. In terms of the challenge that we're facing and that this work stream can assist in solving, really the problem that we're looking at is a more general problem that can already be found in accounting and bookkeeping more generally. And it's a problem of being able to rely on data. It's a problem of data integrity. So the problem is when you are faced with data in any sort of context, and this is a general truth also for distributed ledgers, you need to be able to trust the data, which means that you need to be able to have some sort of visibility over the origins of the data. Now, sometimes the generation of the data may be more or less reliable. The problem is we often don't know, right? And from the point where data is generated in an organization to the point where data is reported, it usually goes through aggregation steps. And in aggregation, data is lost. Furthermore, when data is shared across parties, more data is lost. Parties often do not want to share their ledgers. They do not want to share their books. They do not trust, and it's perfectly understandable. Parties want to keep their own records of things. And while the reality of the world and the economic reality of the events and the environmental reality of environmental events is just one, multiple records of the same reality, which should record the same thing, lead to discrepancies. And it's a problem already at the accounting bookkeeping level that you don't have that reliability you cannot really have integrity and trust the integrity of the data because so much has been lost in prior steps. This is especially a problem in, for instance, in sustainability reporting. And as Wes was saying, as we move forward to higher levels of assurance, it becomes a bigger imperative to be able to solve all of these problems. So you can just like imagine, right? You are trying to calculate your emissions. There's so many different types of emissions. But for instance, one of the data points that you would consider is, I don't know, the millions of kilometers traveled to deliver the goods from one place to the next. However, for that, you might need to collect information from many suppliers. And maybe one of these suppliers is collecting this data, from invoicing. Another has a manual data entry system. Another is, and this relies on some estimations. Others are using the Internet of Things, IoT devices and GPS. Are you going to simply sum these values provided with 3 different methodologies by 3 different suppliers? And if you do it, and this is actually what sometimes happens, is the current state of affairs, is you lose data in aggregation. You lose visibility over the methodologies, as Wes was saying, and you cannot have assurance over the data. So, and I'm very excited to get into this discussion, so I'll leave it there with the problem statement. But by combining these technologies, I'm very excited to say we can start tackling that problem.
Thanks a lot, Juan. And yeah, I'm like on the edge of my seat. So what's the answer? How are we going to address these problems? And I have a feeling you have some ideas. So let's move into a conversation about, as you said, we've kind of set up the challenge statement. So let's talk about DLT, blockchain, the Hedera ecosystem, and why that is such a powerful answer to these problems. I'd love to hear, a specific reference to like a tangible example about the ways in which the use of DLT and the solution set can actually address some of the challenges that we were just talking about. So I guess we'll start back with you, Wes.
Yeah, and I'm happy to take one step back and look at the technology. And even before we get to that statutory reporting and disclosure, what we've built in the Hedera Guardian ecosystem is a rules engine. It lives on top of Hedera that allows you to communicate with the network to log both the methodology, all the rules, the workflows, the forms, the calculations, how they work together to get to a specific unit of outcome. A lot of times it's carbon emissions. We're very excited about the work going on in carbon crediting programs on Hedera, water rights, mitigation reporting, biodiversity reporting. All of these start with their forms and workflows, having an audit to get to the unit of outcome, sometimes under an active standard, sometimes under a regulatory disclosure. Now, in the case of defining these workflows, what ends up happening is if you don't define it ahead of time, you can't audit that you faithfully adhere to those rules. Now, in the case of a carbon crediting program, that methodology is published, it's in a PDF. But in the case of the greenhouse gas protocol, for example, for a corporate standard, or looking at scope 3, that isn't always applied at the most granular level. It's guidance. And then you have to ensure that it's audited to a standard. But oftentimes that you're trying to catch that data after it's already been collected and sort it after it's been collected. And so what happens is you're going system to system to system, like we talked about, and you don't know who said what when. The system had the specific information, but it's not an identity-based workflow of that sensor person or system collected in this way for this purpose, and it's been correctly applied. And so when you go to look at a corporate inventory, sometimes you don't do it necessarily by site. You may just have the financial statements. You may have invoices, bills of lading, and you have to aggregate that after the fact. If you start to collect from a methodological perspective down to the very specific site, and if you're, say, allocating to a product carbon footprint, you need an allocation model for that product carbon footprint. You need to make sure that that product carbon footprint was set in the right state. And so when you start to think about, well, what regulations apply when we do our reporting, how does Hedera do this? Well, we get to that unit of balance, but we can prove if the data has been set up from a methodological perspective to answer to every question of that methodology ahead of time, go through the right workflow, go through the right audit steps, go through the right calculation to get to an issuance of a token, even if it's just for accounting purposes. That reference accounting can be done internally to the corporate standard, or actually do an allocation model to the product carbon footprint. And what happens is, because you're able to put the audit inside of that workflow against a methodology that can be publicly shared and disclosed, even if you don't disclose the data, the opportunity is to pass that upstream or downstream to your value chain partners, either for the product carbon footprint, for different regulations around disclosure to imports and exports, different regulations in terms of reporting within a country, where countries are starting to think about their nationally determined contributions and the different regulations that apply to that. And so what happens from an XBRL perspective is, now if we can start to tag that information, apply the XBRL taxonomy to every piece of information that's collected, that overlay will allow us to be able to say, well, Hedera has provided a fantastic rules engine of the lineage of the data. We know every identity of every person and every credential or attestation in the context of the methodology, and that balance, so that unit of value, which is oftentimes emissions, or converted from methane to, say, carbon and carbon equivalency. What we can ultimately get to is an ability to trust what we're reporting and how it was collected. And Hedera is ultimately the data integrity layer that says, this is what's on my balance sheet from a carbon perspective. And if we wanted to go even further, we can look at the finance of that, but I'm going to save that for another discussion.
No, thanks, Wes. And I feel like in this world, like you're one of the people that can really explain the sort of the technicality, but also like the practicality of it. I really appreciate that, and this idea that we're really trying to lower the burden and the cost of compliance by creating this opportunity for data to flow across a bunch of market opportunities and compliance regimes. So, Juan, what can you add to what Wes has just said? And what's your maybe a tangible example from you about the application and how you see it as transformative?
Yeah, I mean, very hard to add to what Wes says, but I think what I can do is maybe try to redescribe it in another way, probably. So, also taking a step back, right? I was saying this problem that laying out this problem that the data integrity problem is really is to a great extent is a data sharing problem. Parties do not want to share a database. And what we know commercially as blockchains, or to be more precise, distributed ledger technologies, are this technical innovation, this great achievement of the past few decades, where we've managed to come up with shared databases where nobody's in charge and where you don't need to trust a central party, while at the same time having a single record, right? Blockchains and DLTs, they work by replication of the same data across many computers in a network called nodes, but the database is only one, right? And here is an example of these databases, but it's a very particular example and a very special one because it has some special characteristics. First of all, there is actually a council of trusted institutions running nodes, and setting some of the rules of the protocol, but also there's the technical characteristics of the network. It's particularly fast, particularly low energy, and it has some very interesting peculiar characteristics. For instance, in transaction ordering, right? Transaction ordering is quite fair. So the fact that you have a shared ledger, right, where you can start building together a database of what's going on, it allows them to build other things on top of it. right? It is again an accounting problem and more generally a bookkeeping problem, that when you have multiple parties that cannot share the same books, the same records, there's also less incentive to build better systems to introduce better data into the system. Because why bother introducing good data into an unreliable system, right? However, the moment that you have a reliable shared ledger that is fast and that is immutable and that it's open and transparent and you can use, then you can start building additional layers of technology on top of it so that the data that is being inserted is higher quality. And you can leverage the properties of the ledger to actually have full visibility of the origin of the data. That doesn't mean that absolutely everything is going to be perfect, but now you have a methodology, now you have mechanisms to distinguish good data from bad data. So now it's worth it, right? And that's the incredible thing that Hedera has done, in particular, the Hedera ecosystem with this technology, the Hedera Guardian. The Hedera Guardian is built on top of DLT technology, right? It's not the DLT in itself. It's a workflow policy engine that allows to have, for instance, methodologies, climate methodologies, not just digitized as a manual, but actually even executed and recorded through the system, right? And the fact that you can do that, it allows you to also transmit the data from its origin to its more aggregated level. So we sorted out the two problems that we mentioned before. Data is lost in aggregation and data is lost when data is shared. And now that we have sorted those both of those things, we have the potential to have finally the potential for assurance. Then we will have a final problem to sort out, which is reporting, right? And how we share that data, how we aggregate that data, right? Because if we take all of that data and we put it and then and we print it in a PDF, then we are wasting part of the potential of what we have achieved. So I'm going to stop there. Yeah, I don't know, Wes, if you want to add something to what I just said.
No, I think
Well, I'll
nail.
just jump in. Wes can say more, but I just want to say, for an attorney and as a fellow attorney, I think you just check the box on like something that most attorneys can't do, which is like they can see the big picture, but they don't really know how to describe what the heck is really going on. So I think you did a really nice job on that. So Wes, I assume, do you have anything more you need to add, Wes?
No, I'll just say the less PDFs, the happier everyone will be.
Oh my
If
gosh.
I
So
may
Liv,
add a
yeah,
comment, Catherine,
yes.
because what really got me excited about Hedera and not just distributed ledger, and maybe I turn this back over also to Wes, it is that the lower carbon footprint that DLT under Hedera is done because of the way they structure the technology inside and standardize it. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Wes, because that's what really got me excited. We are not, because these blockchains, the biggest complaint about some of this is the use of energy and water for cooling. But what really got me excited was it wasn't just a distributed ledger or blockchain environment. It was the fact that this was actually a very much more environmental friendly solution compared to regular blockchain. So Wes, I don't know. I'm not a technologist. I think the audience should know I'm the accountant and I want this data verified so that I can sign off on the audit report. But the fact that it was also an environmental friendly environment, that was to me one of the key things that attracted me to this dialogue. So Wes, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I'll say something very briefly and maybe ask Juan to chime in, who studied this at length. But in terms of Hedera, it's always had an extremely low carbon footprint because of how it's been designed to be highly performant, highly efficient. So in most technologies, even if you're living at home, just looking at your power bill, you really don't want to have a lot of power because then you're going to have to pay for a lot of power. Hedera's algorithm, the Hashgraph consensus algorithm that underlies the distributed ledger, is just extremely efficient. And the fact that each of these computers aren't run on very expensive hardware that is constantly competing to solve a math problem means that, already because we're not doing that, it's going to be a little bit more efficient. But because the Hashgraph consensus algorithm is so efficient, it's fast, it's fair, highly performant, um, it allows us to not worry about the cost and the impact of the environment. It allows us to actually focus on what we do or what we can do with this technology. And technology should bring you efficiencies besides being cheaper to operate. It should allow you to get to new outcomes that you couldn't get to yesterday. And I think what I'm so excited about the Hedera ecosystem is that Hedera allows you to do things that you couldn't do before, whether it's in the statutory reporting, efficiencies and workflows, and say proving that a carbon credit is real or emissions disclosure is real, down to every single data point, or if we need to migrate up to a new methodology or say the science has evolved, we can do that with a click of a button and isolate all the things that need to change and understand the retrospective or the scenario analysis. Those are all benefits and advantages rather than focusing on what it cost us to get there and trying to make a cost benefit analysis. I think that's the opportunity with this technology. But Juan is really the expert on this topic. I'll let you add further context.
We've studied the environmental impact of blockchains, so in two ways, right? We've studied the environmental potential or the positive impact, as well as let's also develop metrics on any potential negative impact, right? And there's three levels to the second question. The most important one, the one that really breaks the scale of the charts, is really that there are some blockchains that adopt a consensus algorithm called proof of work. They have this activity called mining, and mining is extremely energy intensive, right? By design, this is not an accident, it's part of their security mode. Hedera is part of a group of DLTs that does not do this. So it still has high security guarantees, but it uses other solutions that are not energy intensive to achieve the same goal. So as a result from that, most of the energy use and the associated carbon footprint is removed from the picture. Then there's a second level, and that's the efficiency of the Hashgraph consensus algorithm in particular within this group in which Hedera is, right? It's a highly performant algorithm. It's been math tested. It's really efficient, and that also contributes from a software perspective, if you want, to make it a very efficient chain. And there's a third level, which is more of a hardware level, because even though the Hedera network does not have these machines that do this thing called mining, that is what drives most of the energy consumption, it does have high performance computers constituting the nodes that make up the network, right? You should imagine that in general, a blockchain, your average DLT, whatever it is going to have a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand nodes. That's usually what you are speaking of. And a couple thousand computers, that's what any large company may have these days, right? So it's the same as any large company in the world. It's not a big, as big an impact as, 16 or 20 gigawatt, right? And the sort of other of impact that we see with mining. Now, in the case of the Hedera network, it's not laptops that are running the network as well. It's higher performance devices. And this has some very interesting properties as well. Basically, if, for instance, if you are processing a lot of transactions in a blockchain with a small, not very powerful laptop, the problem is that the laptop will need to turn on more and more cores of the CPU to be able to process more transactions. So your marginal activity has a lot of a higher marginal footprint. Turns out that because the servers are so performant in the Hedera case, the marginal effect of using the network is also extremely, extremely low. It's very hard to see an effect even. So that's also a very interesting thing. We've published a number of academic papers on this matter. You can find them at the Exponential Science website. Also, the Mika Crypto Alliance, an initiative by Exponential Science, we have published some reports. So you're more than welcome to check them. It's an evolving literature, but I think it's a widely recognized, non-controversial fact that these are very efficient technologies.
Thanks so much, Juan. And obviously we're seeing, in a broader conversation about the impacts of AI and data centers, that a lot of things that we want to do that have positive, potential have these other implications. And obviously energy is first, is the conversation. So it's great to hear about, Hedera in that way. So Liv, I'd love to, bring in a little bit more of the XBRL integration. The blueprint talked about, the power of bringing in DLT, and the importance of the sort of the XBRL connection. Can you talk about your work on that? I know that you're one of the founders of XBRL. It would be great just to hear a little bit about that before we do kind of a last round of kind of synthesis prompts.
Yeah, so again, like the Guardian, which sits on top of Hedera Hashgraph, right? It's really about when you look at a company, right? They don't just report one framework, right? They're going to have to map this data to multiple frameworks inside. They report maybe a GRI report in some other country. They might report an ISSB because they're mandated in Brazil. And if they do business in Europe, they got to map this data to the FRAGs and European sustainability standards. These are all in different XBRL taxonomies. The fact that we can, with human consensus, build these rules into their application and then map that to this, right? Because if you think about a company, they don't just report even one report in one country, right? This data, for example, which I did a lot of research on, a climate data point can go to 18 different repositories in the UK or on the web or on their website. So having that consistency of data so that you don't look at different data in different frameworks and having to have all of these body of knowledge to actually understand all of this complexity, the fact that and we have some work to do, and that's why I'm excited that this is just the beginning. The paper just sets the vision. Now we got to roll up our sleeves and collaborate and look at the data that we are capturing within the Hedera and create a mechanism so that this data can flow to multiple different frameworks. I know, Juan, you're very involved with MiCA. MiCA is no different. MiCA regulation, is for blockchain and distributed ledger to disclose information on including the environmental impact, right? So there's another area of a taxonomy that we got to map. So, but that takes consensus building. So we need to come together to kind of build those rules into Guardian. But the fact that we're going to be able to allow company not just to focus on one report, but actually meet the demand of multiple report in multiple jurisdiction is actually very exciting to me. The other thing I want to emphasize that once that's done, IFRS Foundation, ISSB, and even the European Commission are translating those disclosure definition into multiple language. So create ones, produce many is been around for quite some time. But the fact that we can also then push out data in different languages is quite exciting to me. So thank you, Catherine. This is, a topic that I care very much about.
Great. Thank you, Liv. And I do think this opportunity to, take this, you spent a lot of time, scaling XBRL, and I think we're in the same, we're in the same process with DLT, and to actually build on top of XBRL as well is also a scaling mechanism. So it's exciting. Okay, so I could talk with all of you. I have all these follow-up questions, but we're short on time. So I'm going to, just a prompt, one last prompt for each of you. Speaking of this blueprint and this integration, I'd love to hear from Wes and Juan, what are these practical first steps then? If we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the power of DLT and the Hedera ecosystem, we've talked about XBRL. So now we're okay, we've got to start translating all this opportunity into kind of how do we add value? What happens first? So I'd love to hear, Wes, from you, in your mind, when you think about this blueprint and the work you've been doing, and we think about corporates right now, what's the first thing that needs to happen? Maybe the first thing that we need to do and the first thing they need to do. in order for us to begin to move from the beginning to something where we're seeing this impact?
I think it's understand where the ball is going to go. What regulations, what reporting are you going to have to do that isn't going to be the same as it is today, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? If you're at a multinational corporation and you're going to be looking at regulatory exposure in Brazil, California, Europe, you're going to already be going down this path. And instead of having to adjust the ball 3 years from now in an emergency, thinking about how do I get my data structures aligned for the regulations that exist? And what is the right type of system so that I know under which methodologies, under which level of data rigor am I going to have to adjust my systems, and how can I get involved today? How can I help set up the system, get access to the systems that are thinking in this way versus those that are predicting or estimating where I am, where I will be? Because when we start to get to assurance, estimates do not actually report the outcomes that are going to meet the rigor that disclosure is going to require. And I think that that statement, like those estimates, are not the outcomes that actually have happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be very hard to get there. And so if we can start to think about how do we trust that outcome, that's the ultimate first step. And what steps do I need to get there? Well, which applications are thinking about methodological level rigor that gets down to the granular level that reporting requires?
Fantastic, Wes. Juan, additional thoughts?
Well, no, I actually completely agree with Wes that it's a matter of seeing the direction of where this is headed. Maybe I can also take a step back to show also like my experience on this. Even before I knew what a DLT was, I used to work in non-financial reporting. I did a lot of work, for instance, analyzing compliance with the NFRD, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, that is a predecessor of the CSRD, right? And back then, where I was working, we would analyze hundreds of reports and we would have to extract the data manually from hundreds of PDFs and evaluate it using, well, criteria that we sort of try to identify the best we could with methodologies that we would publish, but it would also publish as text. And that, yeah, you could replicate them if you really try, but it would be hard to extract the data. And back then, even we published some documents saying we need machine readability of this data. We need to be able to extract it so that we can aggregate, right? PDFs are very nice because you can use that to read an individual document, and from the human readable perspective, that's very nice. But to make larger data analysis tasks, you cannot work. So you do need machine readability for that. And the CSRD went in that direction. Now, right now we're doing work with the Minka Crypto Alliance, this initiative that is very exciting for us, and we're producing white papers also for many digital assets, including HBAR, right? One of the main asset in the Hedera network, also other projects within the Hedera network like SaucerSwap and so on. And we've been analyzing, again, hundreds and hundreds of white papers, which again are PDFs for now. And these, they have sustainability data, and we need to open hundreds of PDFs, do Control or Command C, Control V, Command V to copy and paste it and translate it somewhere else, or try to do some data scraping techniques because we cannot get the data. So that's a problem. Now, from the end of the year, it's going to be mandatory that the white papers are in XBRL format, and that makes the job a lot easier. Now, interestingly, obviously, the Minka white papers are behind the CSRD. So right now, they're just demanding machine readability. They are demanding the XBRL and compliance with the taxonomy. What soon we're going to see is that now, in a couple of months, we're going to have a lot of data available to us, but we will have digitally tagged data, if you want. The data is unreliable. But now we know, right? We will know, we will see the origin of the data. So this will create the potential of down the line requiring and filtering out data that it does not have proper provenance. So really, the visibility that XBRL machine readability provides is the first step into actually having visibility over the provenance, which is what technologies like The Guardian provide, right? And that brings us back to what we were saying at the beginning. what you can do with Hedera and the Guardian is just incredible. And if you can take all that level of reliability and you put it into a PDF, it's like you made a big symphony and you missed the final note, right? And you're ruining it at the end. But at the same time, if you have a beautifully tagged XBRL document where the data does not have proper provenance, then you have a machine readable document that you cannot trust. But if you put the two and two together, then you have four, right? Then you have something that you can trust. And that's why this blueprint is a very exciting first step.
Love that one. Yeah, actually, you're 2 and 2 is more than 4, is what you're saying. This is off to the races. Liv, anything more that you want to say? The two, Wes and Juan, really nailed it. But in closing, and especially given as an author of the blueprint, anything more you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, the key message here, right? This isn't a technology problem. It is really a competitive problem to companies. And if companies don't bring in this from the top to have a strategy on how they're going to manage data as an asset versus a liability, it's going to be a competitive disadvantage. I have one message to everybody and to our audience. Please join us in helping connecting the data to XBRL, because it's not going to just be an XBRL. Companies also have software solutions that do other reports and multiple reports and additional data in. We need the software vendors to come to the table and open up to be able to consume this data so that they can help their clients produce the multiple documents that statutory reporting and internal reporting. This is a competitive advantage. If I was a CEO or a CFO in a company, I wouldn't go to sleep unless I had a distributed ledger strategy within my company to point to statutory reporting, but the tokenized economy is here. You need to have a strategy inside your company on how you're going to compete in this market that is not here in 10 years, it's here now. Now is the time for you as a company to actually put that strategy together. And one more key message to the auditors: you as an auditor need to ask why they are not using distributed ledger and connecting automation of reporting, because how are you otherwise going to do the audit? So I think the push and the pull, and investors as well, they will want to know that this data is actually auditable and assurable and trusted. So call your companies and say, what's your distributed ledger strategy? And then join us on the next phase of the white paper, where we actually solve the problem, and don't be part of the problem, be part of the solution.
Well, thank you very much for that, Liv. I wanted to just say, like in summary, it was interesting. Both of you talked about data systems, and that it's interesting. In my work in California on the disclosure implementation of the new disclosure laws, and talking to lots of companies, companies really are thinking about the longer term, right? They know they have to solve the immediate pain point, but they do know that a data system that's going to serve multiple purposes is where they do have to go. So I think that we've got companies now recognizing that,
Catherine, you're
whether they
breaking
want
up.
it or not, that this is the way to get. The future is the integration and data systems, and DLT is an important part of that. And thank you, Juan, too, for the symphony metaphor. That was fantastic. And just thanks for all of your work. And Liv and I loved working on this report, and we're excited about next steps. So all of you have a great day, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And congrats again on a great report and blueprint. We, really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation as well. My congratulations and my enthusiasm for everything that is being achieved.